If you enjoy Dark Whispers stories, join my channel. Please share where you're from in the comments. Let's get into these stories. I moved a lot as a child, and that continued into high school. Within a year and a half, I had changed schools 4 times. When I started at my last school, I did not know anyone, as the total number of pupils in my class was 4. I was introduced to my new friends by a buddy of mine who happened to be in a band with them. He was the biggest at all. Whenever they were there, we included him in our group even though he was older than some of us, by at least 7 ages. He looked much larger than me, even though he was like twice my size. I was not bothered by the fact that he bullied, but I was so scared of the bigger kids, except for this little guy. As a result, it was not appropriate to stay at home, so I wanted to remain as far away from home as I possibly could. After school, sometimes I used to stay till 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. just in order not to go back home. We used to walk with those boys as we were from the same neighborhood. However, one evening, it was dark and cold along the way home, Sam told me else things that had happened to him in California. He had left his friend alone while walking home with her, and had been followed around by someone when she reached the end. To what extent what happened afterwards was never detailed in his case or with me. Although I found his story to be odd, I accepted it. I was following him. We two were very close. We instantly talked. He primarily spoke about California, but later told me about his dark feelings. He arrived and texted me late into the night. I didn't grasp his woes, but yearned to support him. After a while, he asked me to be his girlfriend in front of my friends. He was initially sad about it. I liked another guy, then turned him down. He got hurt and sad about my reply. Since then, I avoided being near him. He said his sister looked like me. He told me a lot about her. He said she had curly brown hair like mine. Her blue eyes were like mine too. Then he told me something terrible. They were coming home when a man attacked them. The man had a knife. He wanted to steal from them, but the man killed her instead. That was on her birthday, the 24th of January. It was also my birthday. I got very scared when I heard this story. The man told it many times. Each time he made it worse. He said Sarah's blood was everywhere. I saw her brown hair and blue eyes. I was her clone. I think I got connected to him. Every time he told the story, it felt nearer and nearer to me. He was always watching over me, yet he was not peaceful at all. I could not remain calm. I had no love for my boyfriend nonetheless. I stayed with him, as I knew he would always be there. The fright was no more in town and school. Sam had a breakdown and revealed about his worries to me. I saw him cry, and it pulled at my heartstrings. There was no consolation for my buddy. I wanted to aid in healing him. He then told me a new and scary story. At a concert in California, we were attacked by a knife-wielding beggar. In that instance, I thought of calling for help. He viewed me as helpless, and thus defended me instead once more. Under the light of the torch, they walked within the forest. He noticed how fresh air felt good and was comfortable. At this time of year, flowers started blooming, and the fjord was blue. Sam said he had killed the Stalker together, who used to be his friend, and he wondered if there was a hallucination around then. Sam talked about how the old man had come back alive, only to haunt his steps again. It was all so strange that finally, Sam had lost the friendship, that they were forced by this fear to get help, as there was no way that he was only looking out for the Stalker by himself. Sam had told the counselor that she was the one that killed God. Hence, Sam was because God's power had made her leave California. The counselor then warned Sam to be alert, and told about the guy named Sam who spoke to. He did not consider Sam as being mentally disturbed, nor that he posed any threat to anyone in general, and this was done without. During this was not what happened there. As far as not believing happened when there was really no one who did care about it. I did not consider police help. I only just wanted the boy on me to feel some pity. Sam was a great monster. I very little hoped that he would treat me nicely. Everywhere during my walking, I hoped for my safety. Fear and anxiety consumed me. Sam, a close buddy, whom I have decided not to see again, had a great hold on me. 5 months ago, I made an evening walk to found the Value Village thrift shop. On the way home, while walking my dog without a leash, I felt lonely and very bored. For quite a long time, I had been offended by my partner Sam. Evening time became so dangerous to walk alone. The situation of Valley Village was enveloped with great darkness. I could hardly see anything. There were no cars in the parking. It was dark. Just me. So quiet. Suddenly, A scary face came out from behind a wall. It frightened me. I checked out the area with sun still shining. No cars meant the place was empty. I walked towards my car. Some meters ahead, I decided to unlock the door. Before entering, I saw a man at the bus stop near my car. He was about 30 feet away from me. The man was near the edge of the parking lot. His eyes were searching. He asked for a cigarette. I had none to give him. His next question was weird. "Comte, ich have a snack?" I replied, "I do not smoke." When I moved close to him, he got nervous. His eyes searched if I had money or cash. He stood behind me, but then he mumbled something and left. I said something unkind. He hurried away just like he had come out of hiding behind the wall. In a fraction of time, I realized that he would possibly overwhelm me if I became the prey of his intentions. I was getting scared that my life was on the wrong end. I felt that he might be bad. He acted like a hobo who asked for cash or smokes. He seemed weird, asking unusual for them. When I said no, he stared at me for a while and left. My gut told me he would pursue me. I parked the car but had to take my eyes off him to open the back door and let my dog in. He never wants to jump in the car easily. As I buckled him, I looked back and noticed the guy had vanished, but I still felt uneasy. I turned around. I saw him. Again, about 10 feet behind me, walking toward me quietly. His hands were not in the pockets, but hid inside the coat top of the slightly open zipper, as if hiding something. We locked eyes briefly. Then he just froze. I quickly got in the car and locked the door. It seemed to take forever, though probably simply due to feeling scary. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking from the shock. Luckily, he halted before I got into the vehicle. I just drove away, trying to push it out of my mind, but I couldn't get rid of that unsettling feeling. There was no one else in the parking lot, and it seemed strange for him to be there. For 4 years now, I have been having a stalker issue. He's never really threatened or harmed me in any way, but he's acted rather peculiar. He always sends me letters and little gifts, like photos from outside my apartment. I've called the cops numerous times, but they have not been able to find him. Eventually, I found a Reddit IMA subreddit, where I shared my story since I don't have any social media accounts. One person even asked if he knows about my posts on Reddit. I thought he might be angry, but I wasn't concerned. Well, I was wrong. He did discover it, and it upset him. Up until then, he hadn't openly threatened me, just acted creepy. The worst incident was when he sent me a picture of myself opening my door. It must have been taken by a hidden camera. I felt strange, but thought perhaps it was just another odd thing he did. One day, nothing came through from him for about a week. Then suddenly, I received a letter on my doorstep. It was from him, but it had weirdly printed out some questions, together with answers that are from my Reddit post. The note was very angry. It talked about my boyfriend. The person said I owed him something. He was mad I liked my boyfriend. Then he sent a big scary box. It had things like ropes and broken glass. Also, my picture, but without my boyfriend. I could not find him in it. That scared me. Some notes fell out of the broken frame. They looked like threats. I called the police. They were very worried. They would patrol more often. I hoped it would stop. But after a week, it began again. New letters were again there in my mailbox. I woke up to some unwanted surprise. There was broken glass under my doormat. I thought my boyfriend should call the cops immediately upon seeing that. My car had also been vandalized, with the lights broken, and the windshield had been marked with the message declaring that I should watch out for my own life. I was so scared and confused. The police very much obliged. They thought highly of the case. At first, it didn't get on my nerves as much as it did later on when I saw my car and the awful message had been painted on the windshield. Since I had a dash cam, the police could get some leads as to who this stalker might be. The images were bad, but they said there was no sufficient evidence on record. They reassured me that such a matter needed to be followed up on and sent patrols to the neighborhood for a couple of days. Yesterday morning at around 4 a.m., somebody knocked on our door. Neither I nor my boyfriend responded to it. I was terrified. I could barely think clearly. The police came while that thing was going on. A neighbor who had just returned from his night shift had caught sight of it. A man had followed him into the building. I alerted my neighbors, who knew not to allow anyone into the house without permission. the way he had the stalker's plan unfold in the darkness of night. In case you need to contact BTGC Send, kindly join the contact list where one gets to receive messages about bookings and any updates concerning the booking process. A few hours later, I met with someone. Unfortunately, I did not carry any documents or letters to confirm the information he gave. Thus, I had to rely on what he said. He said he received a message from God to invite me. The loss of his life would be immensely painful for his family and friends. He could have gotten around without any police. There were no doubts regarding the matter at all. A policeman was beside him. Perhaps I was unconscious somewhere. The question from the officer was, "Are you sure your car was parked there the night before?" It is not right to speak to or treat clients that way. After some time of talking about women, the barman demanded an explanation for staying in the back. On going out again, he tried to convince us that the police were just performing their duties. All he wished was to have me leave the office. What if I had disrespected an officer while I knew he wouldn't be prosecuted, irrespective of the situation? I told them I was through with it. If at all there were any who remained, they merely stared at themselves in the mirror before walking away. Surely the men had a great reverence for women, almost as though they were divine. Whenever I come across a group of men sharing stories, I am always reminded of this event. I feel elevated during such times. It all began at the Odeon Disco Night, where I was appointed to go to Radio Disco, which had only a few attendants. To look good, I needed both clothes and hair, which made me stand out. I attempted not to fit in hard, but quite different. In no time at all, I became the center of attraction everywhere. Since high school days, I hadn't been very sociable. Yet in this environment, I was doing well and was very much adored. Instead of being a mere observer, it was in the only place where I felt accepted. My friends and I danced together while the girls were dancing across the floor. Suddenly, one of the guys appeared and introduced himself. We soon realized that we shared many interests like hobbies and musical styles. Unmistakably, the patterns of girls dancing on the floor contrasted with boys lounging about chatting. I saw the cop car close by with its lights on. A window rolled down, but I didn't think about it. When he was asked who he was, he said, "My stalker." Finally caught after 4 years, it made things worse. Only one neighbor noticed so far. The police told me he'd get in big trouble if arrested now. I kept everything he sent over the years. Notes, gifts, and letters locked away. For now, I feel relief from my worries. But I'm actually a 24-year-old woman, unsure if I'm paranoid or if it's real. So I've come here to ask people what they think. I've had mental health issues for a long time. Walking alone helped, especially on sunny days when I needed an escape. 1 week before, I was following my usual path on a beautiful day, just listening to music and enjoying life. Suddenly, I saw a man on a motorized bike. He looked familiar. He'd been at the gas station around the corner 2 days ago. He must have caught sight of me. It is never easy to feel uneasy, but passing by a skateboarder makes me feel strange. I later wrote that I would forget him. However, after taking a turn, I found him looking at me as I walked through a crosswalk. His stare gave me chills. So I removed the earplugs and smiled, pretending all was well. But inside, I felt uncomfortable about him. Now, I reconsidered going back on a longer road that was different from my original route. However, his bike zoomed past when I reached the block's end. Again, I observed him at the church in front on my next street. He was staring at me from there. I felt stalked and prayed that God would help me escape. I even tossed a coin just to be sure, as I became increasingly nervous. My imagination turned wild, thinking maybe he was following me deliberately as a setup scheme for me. The neighborhood looked quiet with spacious spaces and few houses unlike before, and I felt I had gone wrong by taking this path today. Yet after another turn leading home, there came again this odd shiver, a feeling watched over by him, followed closely behind again by authorities. As I turned, I heard a bike behind me. I felt anxious, so I Skyped my boyfriend to tell him where I was. I wanted somebody to know just in case something happened. When I hit the block near my house, I saw him crossing the street looking for something. I panicked and rushed across the street into my house. I locked the door and tried to calm my racing heart. Is my anxiety making me overreact? I have PTSD and always watch my surroundings. But this felt different. My instincts screamed danger. I haven't walked out since then. I carry pepper spray now. I was too small to defend myself. I cope by speculating the worst cases. Thank you for reading. It's good to let this out. My story is from summer 2001. I was 17 and with Mike and Chris on Saturday evening when the sun set. I recall one day jamming out to some classic rock tunes in my room like all young kids did back then. After some time, I began to feel uneasy being alone, so I chose to meet up with Mike and Chris for something adventurous. We parked at Mike's house to have a few beers and smoke before heading into the wild. We wandered down a narrow trail, cutting through some woods to a small lake close by. As we got there, it was deserted, except for the sound of crickets in the tall grass. We settled on an old bench by the water and talked for a while. Chris then suggested checking out this old fishing hut that was right on the beach, hence we went searching for it together, although it seemed creepy from the outside. On pulling in, Mike and Chris started breaking things up, while I felt strange as if someone was watching us. We climbed up into a loft where an ancient boat lay covered in spiderwebs and began poking around. Out of nowhere, the front door creaked open and we could hear heavy footsteps walking around, followed with labored breathing noises. At that instant, we froze and could hardly breathe, as it felt like our hearts would jump right out of our chests. The silence lasted too long. We thought it would never end. To sable the skeptics, it took just a few seconds. My emotions made me shiver unexpectedly. I sneaked in at the back. Only atop a fence were my feelings visible, I cried. This schoolmate was using Tesla like a new toy. They only saw fun. But my head said I lasted too long being masked at home. Finally, I would not listen to vain advice. I shut up all else until I had reason to be worried. Chris carefully shuffled harmlessly across rooftops while brandishing a swatch at hand. From one side on side next, he crept edging nearer towards some inch gap. Even so, it was not yet open. A lady named Discretion seems anxiously happy about her attempts to cut off Strangler, soon following those already chasing them previously, and detectives never cared enough to take after trifles, hence everything depended on what I told them. Thus, he shot down. Everybody lost it, just requires some sense only for the house. Magically belongs to you. Even they would readily seize such loss. Thanks so many billions from trickles of Greg Davidson. Unto friends being likewise. Oops. Unless they couldn't tell later on, Jane proofing photoshopped pictures when heaps of reflections done at some fancy salon owned by Cindy Hurst. This world place whole management by Good Times, which happens to be so nauseating. I found it strange how I started using Morse code suddenly long ago, yet I saw the great display of beat envy that was made from various kinds of beats and instruments. Again came the strange sound of a woman's voice, included there in the crowd of other musicians beside. I tried hard to explain, though I was lonely at times. Further, a lot of positive remarks didn't seem to make sense for me, which only confused my thought process and led me into making mistakes on something small scale as I started enjoying some part, the encouraging words of some people. Other people followed my lead. I got the courage to read their behavior as my own sort of way. Out of whatever their hopelessness things were, gremlins made me angry with White X Rose's amazing things. The crowd was talking across each leader made mad speech, but all similar events what they cared was in word forever. Only hearing the mumble of what like was their echoing little boy. He told me scary point out, "Go, mall hooligans, I had ran fast our board the fishnet old." That man was very near. I could clearly hear his voice not far off. His footsteps kept moving closer. "I can hear you," he whispered, growled as though he was very near me. My heart raced. I froze. My buddy and I were too frightened and cautious to breathe. The man had started to knock and shove things as though he was clueless. We were like cornered mice with nowhere to fly. Sudden and came fall caught us as he reckoned us the whole time. "Caught you!" His voice exploded like thunder. Jake shoved him back, and he crashed down. In an instant, we hastened off to the grassy area through the shed. The man tore after us like a wild beast. We ran so fast then, all at once he was below up. At Mike's garage, we were breathing very heavily. I almost made my heart misfire. Perhaps that man had gone far away to breathe again, after all the running he had done. My heart almost went to pieces when Jake tried to tell us about the fall which had rendered a knife fell. For long we simply stared at it without saying anything. The night it occurred keeps coming back to me. Jake might have missed the man. What if we had failed to run away? That is a thought I do not want to dwell on. This incident happened about a month ago when I was 20 and had just been on a part-time job at Goodwill for 2 weeks. Frankly, it was scary. During the week, I worked mostly at the cash register. However, I also had responsibilities in the back room. Once upon a time, my supervisor had gotten me a new item for the close. At first, I could not pay attention to him. I began to talk to him straight away. He took a look at me and said, "This job is terrible, isn't it?" I only shrugged and confirmed that every job has some downsides. Simple talk. Once we completed the close, it was my break. I discovered him sitting on the couch waiting for me so that I could assist him with sweeping. I was irritated by now, so I told him, "Only 10 minutes." He replied he desired to do something. I started sweeping, but he followed closely behind me, asking very personal queries like my school. I ignored the chat totally. He asked me how old he looked. I had a feeling of him being around 28. He then told me that he was 36. All of a sudden, he began talking about hanging out at Taco Bell. I became weary. He asked me what time I would be done with my shift. I ain't seriously where this was going, though. 2 weeks ago, my friend and I met these both guys in a chat group called 3090. Me and my buddy met the bigger guy. For some weird reason, he just smiled at me out of the blue. I did not know what to say. I opened the door for my friend who was escorted by him. I had this secret feeling that maybe it was someone behind me who was going to open now, but oh, shock still, it was done by myself. A few hours later, out of the Taco Bell where I was working at, my friend looked at one of the assistants. The teenager began talking to him. As per himself, he observed me and offered me a cigarette, yet liked seeing me in trouble. I later realized that the fella in green, who appeared to be normal as compared to others, there was whispering things that abated my struggle. It was like he had pulled a ghost trick on me. My bosses warned me about a worker. He often bothered other women. One said he was too young and had bullied her before. There were worries he spent too long in the men's toilet. I heard rumors of him smoking weed. After some time, he was told to leave. On the next day, he parked by his car without entering the store, since my bosses had seen his vehicle before they got worried. The next time I finished working, I noticed a dark parking lot scary, but about 10 feet away. I only wanted to go home badly. One night, I heard a door open while unlocking my car. It was him calling me again. I froze since I couldn't believe it was him. I didn't intend to follow him. Approaching me, he could suddenly see my boss closing the store, thus entering his car and driving off quickly. My heart was beating very fast when I went to tell my boss about what happened. I still cannot believe that I went through this. We both talked for a time and decided to take the same bus back home for safety. When I got home, I told my mom about it. She was worried and said I should quit my job. To be honest, I was already going to quit. I told my boss that I was resigning, and she understood and said that she had already reported it to the police. It shocked me a bit, but it wasn't my fault. Now I have 2 kids and live alone in a small town. My fiancé was living with us, but when I caught him cheating, I had to kick him out. My home is in northern Pennsylvania. In the front, there is a very large open field that goes on for a long distance before you reach the woods. The trees are older than the years, as the town has no houses beside this field. There are 3 windows in the living room. My bedroom has a window that faces the field too. During the daytime, many children and some adults walk their dogs there. I do not like having no privacy, as in my situation, no one really keeps an eye on things anymore. I was rather amused with the view right through my window blinds, as well as the curtains that were still in their original form, providing an overlook which showed part of neighboring property. The view was so beautiful it made it difficult for me not to give in to the temptation. One very hot summer night in 2020, I could not sleep, and to make it worse, it was quite stuffy, so I had opened my window and my curtains up to the max. While I was just lying on the bed, I had a view of a speckle, like a shimmer, of dark red and light yellow outside my window. On checking, I came to know that a drone was launched at the precise spot where I was. I not only woke up at that corner, but also dashed down where I had asked my fiancé to be. I told him about the drone situation, and he went straight to the window. Unfortunately, he reached it the moment the drone took off. I was freaked out, thinking in my mind, did the drone have a camera, or was it someone stalking me? To be on the safer side, I kept the blind closed for some time afterward, and it was then when the winter of 2021 came. I think after some time, I became quite relaxed and supposed it was only a one-off occurrence with a drone. I put my blinders back again. Just this time, it was one of the new ones, for example. This can happen every day, at the same time when the sun comes out, and I have the same euphoria on social media. Nothing bad. But at that point, the lights were shining exactly as before. Gosh, it was a shock that the drone was still there. It didn't move even a bit. I guess I was too scared to leave the house for a number of minutes, but when I finally glanced up, it wasn't there. I quickly secured them and dressed, knowing that something was wrong and being totally stupid to leave the window open, especially after I had just taken a shower. But then things are getting out of hand. What bothers me the most is that 2 weeks ago, I took my 3-year-old son out to play in a deserted field with a ball. I had sent my fiancée away the day before. I was with my 7-month-old daughter. We had been outside for a while when I suddenly saw a drone above us. It looked like it was watching us. I ran into the house with my daughter. Inside, I closed the blinds and told my mother about it. She said I should watch out for anything strange. I opened the blinds a tiny bit. After dinner, my daughter had her food while my son was playing near the window. Suddenly, he shouted, "Dada, Dada." I thought he was missing his dad, but he kept on saying it while pointing at the window. I was really scared. He calls his father Dada, but was it really his father outside? A spooky person was leaping behind my window, and nobody saw him. There was little light in the yard, and anyone who sneaked out as quiet as a mouse was hard to make out. I almost thought it was my ex-husband, the friend who lived near, but a nagging worry said it could be him or her, so I had to look outside. I dashed to the window amidst some anxiety. I tried to lift up the blinds and realized my knees were shaking a lot. A bald man with a mustache squatted outside my window. He had a beard and looked very scary. I could not tell his age. He could be anywhere between 30 to 50 years old. It was when he noticed my presence that he grinned creepily. When I yelled for him to go away, he stood up slowly, and I asked if he wanted to talk. He muttered something, but I only shouted back it was scary. He responded by banging hands on my window, yelling no. It sent chills down my spine. I shut the curtains fast before more shouting came. The man had been stalking me for months. He knocked on my window and said he would kill my kids unless I went with him. I dialed 911 but was very scared. My children were crying. The operator told me to hide upstairs until the police came. The man was shouting at us. He said he was tracking me. I hid my kids upstairs but had to wait for help. The neighbors saw him and he ran away. Police came but couldn't find him. I stayed at my parents' place afterward. I was too scared to go home. The guy across the street was so awful. He got into my nerves. He would act like a drunkard, making noise and blocking my way each time. I had no inkling why he picked on me. A pity my neighbors came to my rescue. I did not know what to think. Anyway, he was my ex-in-law's mate. When it came to the incessant beeping of his car as it pulled onto the street every other day, the situation was already getting out of hand. He seemed to take pride in bothering me. At times I'd find him parking nearby at work only to greet me in that bemused way as I worked beyond the windows, which made me uneasy. He just sat the same way by my shop as if he followed my movements. I received many of his harassing phone calls. Amongst his replies were just true like, "I adore you, Lisa." I reported this habit to several people around me, but none seemed to regard it serious. In the eyes of my ex-partner, his sister bore more weight than I did. So judge for yourself subsequently to rolling up his finger on the top of my thoughts. BGD, you stay out there in society. I initially ignored my husband's unreasonable behavior until it became unbearable. Later, I advised my children to stay away from their aunt. However, I eventually shared the truth with them about her and my husband's affair. I got a call one day from a church member who told me that my husband's brother-in-law was lingering at her street for days. I informed her about my husband's reckless behavior and advised her to be cautious. She informed me the day after I had cautioned her that he had forcibly entered her house, chastised her, and confined her against her living room wall. She bellowed and luckily fled away. She then reported the incident to her boyfriend, who contacted the police. Then she called my sister-in-law. I'm certain that she didn't believe her. Never did my sister-in-law believe what I said. She made excuses on behalf of him, such as, "He is merely friendly and does not mean it any other way." A present-day example, how come no one took any measures soon after my husband left? I was on my way to go take care of some old man, but he followed me closely behind my car. He did not only trail my car, but also pushed me off the road. It was sheerly impossible for me to handle such a situation, so I stepped out my car, intending to engage him. He drove his car up to me, and I detected the smell of alcohol emanating from him. He shouted at me, claiming that I was pretending not to see him. He was very angry. I just wanted to be safe, so I went over to my friend's house. I also thought about calling the police. Over years, he threatened me a lot. I was sad, yet I did not want to hurt his dear sister. Now that we had parted ways, it was a different story. Then how different were we really? It seemed as if he wanted to reach the end of me. First of all, he tried to run me off the road. After that, I did not know what he was capable of. At the same time, I was dating someone else. I told him the truth, and he lost it. I asked him for some time and suggested a plan for him to help me out. All I wanted was for him to drive my car to the place where I was being stalked. It was extremely urgent and wasted no time to call me immediately, and told me he got a line of one of my other boyfriends. He said no sooner had he seen my boyfriend there in the car than he would run away, which was madness, but showed a certain aspect of the situation. This happened between 2009 and 2013, while my boyfriend was my husband by then, and he got fed up in the end. He took it upon himself after marriage to confront this man in a gentlemanly manner. For once he managed to solve that issue for small time, maybe a year or so, but it sprang back with double strength. The main drama took place on the 31st of October 2013, when he made 57 phone calls to me on that single day. The fact that only pay phone there in that region worsened matters. It was like a real-life detective story. My husband saw a man follow me. He took my phone and went to the payphone. My husband yelled at the stalker to stop calling me. The guy sped away as if nothing happened. We called the police later. We knew that stalking was not the only problem. It was about my past and family troubles. That was tough for me. The stalker was protected by his family. The officer suggested that we ask for a restraining order. We waited to decide. The officer confronted the stalker at his house. The wife was angry, I reported them. She said I was ruining their lives. She told me I made her husband lose his job. He called her 50 times a day, but never spoke. When asked how long he'd been at it, she said for 23 years. There was no response. They still saw the family, but awkwardly. I had done nothing wrong, so I no longer cared. He hadn't called me since. His mother made him do it. She got it after the cops were involved. My husband would protect me and get rid of him. Stalking isn't just by strangers. Family can do it too. Being close makes it worse. They know your emotions and will use them against you. We confronted him many times before going to the police. He pretended to be friendly and protective. If someone you know harasses you, speak up. Ignoring it lets them win. I decided that I would never drink alcohol again, especially after the final treatment I had. The psychologist I had was very enjoyable. There were excellent opinions in the literature regarding them. At times in the past, I felt like telling people things that they had the opportunity to hear from me, or that things should have been managed differently before I lost myself. There were certain moments whereby I was feeling like I left the people I loved, discontented with what I was saying or doing to them. All were in awe and terror of what I did. That is why I liked adversely, since they might have liked me so far due to that. At last, I did take it as very fine it started. As such a person, they had to bear with me in spite of my weakness. That is, while it bears witness, they went through most of the things I was going through at that time. A frequent, strong connection until this present day. And there they care for me so much whenever I asked for and received a lot from them, easily at all times because of that. To them, one must thank enough the one who has made the suffering of such things to be lessened through being there with me all along. I was a regular complainer. I looked at my studies only without a second thought. My urge was more to read only what my teachers had asked me to. However, I found that I could only start somewhere to yield some positive results by starting in little steps. Once I had put my thoughts across, the transformation began as well. I was living life as a normal teenager. I kept feeding the insatiable desire I had for eating and scrolling through the internet. The institution that is the University of Southern California has established itself as a global brand. It stands out among its contemporaries for the excellent academic programming it has. Back in my primary school, I was popular and had numerous friends. There were a few girls in my group of friends who needed my help with their studies. I had an easy time in class, therefore I was able to lend them my assistance. It is actually a matter of decoding the last part of the sentence, and in the case where it was wrong, allowing the suspect to do something is still within reason. But when the stalker takes action, however, it is up to you to take a stand and prevent a possible occurrence. My parents split up about 3 years ago. Things were initially fine. I was 13 years old. The quarrels had put a strain on the relationship, but we were also not new to this, as it had happened for a long time. Difficult, I could not relate well with my father, and we did not share the same interests or values. At times, I would even avoid him or greet him because of our differences in characters. I was afraid of my dad. He was acting creepy. Whenever I went outside, I felt watched. One day, I was taking the dog for a walk when my dad stopped his car nearby. He drove close to me as if to scare me. I froze. I remembered another day when he followed me in his car. I tried to walk fast, but he kept up with me. It felt like he knew where I was going. He did strange things like wanting to come to my workplace, but he didn't know where I worked. It made me uneasy. He seemed to be everywhere I went. I thought he was spying on me. I wanted to share my story on Reddit without being judged. My dad's behavior troubled me. I often have goosebumps when I think about my childhood experiences, especially when I was a little kid. I used to be scared of large groups. In fact, a lot of my first signs of autism appeared at that time. The incident took place in 2007 or 2008. I went to elementary school. The neighbors in my area were close-knit, and since most of the kids at my school were refugees, it created a unique bond among us. One evening, my parents and I decided to take out our pets for a walk. The sun had already gone down, but our neighbor's house was just close, so they obliged while we walked there. I distinctly remember walking into their house. As soon as I closed the door behind me, I spotted a dark shadow which startled me. I saw some figures in the distance but didn't know where my friends were looking. I thought T's house was too close to bother. As I got closer, I could see a person walking towards us. This shadowy figure looked weird and scary. It seemed to twist its body in an odd way. I felt sick in the stomach. It walked slowly, but then again its movements somehow looked the same. Trying not to care didn't help. It got more creepy when we were close. There were no other cars or people around, just us four and this shadowy stranger who kept getting nearer. D hadn't spotted it yet, but my heart was racing. That figure was utterly silent, gliding smoothly toward us without even causing the air to move. The way it behaved made it way scarier. Seriously freaked out. I wanted to seem calm in front of D, but I began doubting everything. It was just a black shape with no face, almost like a black hole. Deep down, I wanted to flee, but that'd make me look cowardly. I felt strange. My little brother and I were alone. We felt uneasy. I stared at the shape ahead. It didn't move. I expected noises. I looked back all the time. The shape came close. We walked on the same path. A strange being was following us. We couldn't identify it. We walked 1 or 2 houses to the tea house. The creature breath was near me. It was invisible, but it felt like it was looking at us. I thought we were in trouble. An air obstruction was blocking the way. It felt like a long-held breath. I glanced at D, who was calm. I was terrified. The only place we could go was my friend Ting's house. I urged him to hurry. My heart skipped beats. My breathing was fast. It felt like D's breath. We ran. The creature was still following us. When I looked again after the last glimpse, it was gone into thin air as suddenly as it had appeared. I couldn't see it later, like it was concealed at that point. Luckily, we eventually reached T's abode, which indicated that the scare had not lasted that long. The entire episode felt so awful to me that I could not bear facing the mascots and performers as I used to do before. I have an indelible memory in mind that the being that looked at me previously was not human. I still wonder if that thing was maybe a spirit watching me from some distance. I want to talk about what happened that night back in the days not far from home, when I was nearly 13 years old. A new boy named D allotted a place in my neighborhood, and therefore he became my companion. D would be my closest comrade. Within a week after D's arrival, he also became biking buddy. Parents told me they have seen us playing around with new friend, thus surprised how he joined our group. Correctly, but on this day of the event, it was distinctly different. Once I reached home 401, without greeting anybody, I went out straight away. At that particular day, I barely listened to the surrounding sounds. Being busy with schoolwork plus revising for tests, it was like a caught fish whose life was being slowly drained away while just following friends around. It approached 5:15 in the evening, and my friend as well as I were still basking under sun when suddenly one of us played a prank so frightful. Had I told him stop now, it would have been embarrassing. Thus, this was precisely what D, 8217's intention. Then we thought of how to make a prank, where Big D suggested to throw T into the pool, then changed his mind and started talking about T's cousin, who he saw as a nerd hiding behind. In the end, only D was ready, and I also sat T at the edge of the pool for a long time because I did not like the idea of him wetting himself. But finally, I set no limits, and that was the end of everything. I jumped into the water doing a somersault dive, in showing that I am now ready for almost everything. I was so happy to land on the water, and thus came T, who looked white like a starch after we had separated for some moment in time. Most boys usually liked the way T made jokes. Even if he was mad but at the same time giggling in my face, it was quite evident through both his smiling mouth and breathing pattern, which also does not match. I really want you all not to ask me more than I can reply regarding the stories. I feel that by doing so, I can be honest with you. At a distance, a shadow appeared to be like a man in black clothing. Yet we got nearer. One saw a gorilla suit being worn by it. In the days that followed, this did not make sense to me in my emotions. We were walking alongside the pavement, adjacent to T's home. Then out of the blue, the gorilla-costumed person dashed toward us, shrieking in a bothersome way, as gorillas would. The fervor with which it ran terrified me beyond measure, compared to an instance of complete silence we previously experienced. Our reward was frozen brains, as I practically screamed a little bit louder than my buddy. We ran for dear life, stopping only at T's point, knocking on their door in panic. All I could hear was a pounding heart, like it was about to burst. My imagination took me to a lot of extremes, none of which I really wanted to think about now. When T's mom opened the door, she noticed how startled we were, and that we were still breathing hard. However, for the life of me, I couldn't explain what in the world had gotten into us. The moment she realized odd guests were mere kids traumatized by an unfortunate encounter, she ushered us safely inside before securely closing the door behind her. The poor lady had no idea whatsoever what a gorilla suit was about. Once she checked outside and discovered nothing peculiar, I never saw that being again, nor did its attire. That event continues to haunt me until now. I cannot quit wondering what happened. I still think about the person who scared me. It might have been an adult. They could have thought it was fun to frighten us. Not knowing for sure who it was bothers me. I sometimes remember a person in a gorilla costume chasing two boys, but I never saw that person again. It was funny at the time. However, nobody ever talked about it. I wanted to know who the gorilla was. The whole thing has stayed in my mind. It was weird. This incident happened 2 years ago. I am 18 years old now. I graduated and began working as a cleaner. My boss was a cousin and helped me while at work. Protect your life and must wear masks. This I tell to everybody I meet. I worked as a part-time warehouse worker, doing simple tasks during the lockdown. I was still in high school. Frank was working at night. We occasionally chat about law. At first, he was a nice guy, but later on, he made me feel uncomfortable. He would chat about personal stuff, and even told me about his girlfriend's illness. I was only 16. I found it strange for him to share so many details with me. It was tough working with him. I felt sorry for him, but at the same time, he was much older than me. There were too many inconsistencies. For one, when he once claimed he had a Mustang, he even showed me a picture of it, but it was clear that it was just a picture from Google. I didn't know whether to be confused or think he tried to impress me. The biggest red flag was when he gave me his phone number. I know you're probably wondering why I took it, but I was just a nice, trusting teenager. I thought maybe he was just lonely or needed someone to talk to. After that, things escalated quickly. Frank started messaging me daily. He would send me texts or photos of his so-called sick GF. He'd say things like, "Look at this photo of her. Elis his stunt. She's not cute, right?" But it wasn't the photos that creeped me out. It was the constant updates about his life, about his supposed relationship and how everything was going downhill. One day he told me it was his birthday, and he was sad because he couldn't celebrate with his girlfriend. Then he told me to check his WhatsApp story. I looked and there were hundreds of girls wishing him a happy birthday, but the same message was repeated over and over: happiness, Sarah, kidding. Just like with others, he was the one greeting me in the morning, giving me hugs and wishing me a happy birthday. But the thing is, the photos from his story were just made up. I recognized some of them from the internet. It hit me that he wasn't honest with me about anything that he was communicating with me then. It was like he was someone else pretending to be me, trying to create something untrue to make himself seem more interesting or appealing. I felt bad about it, but at that point, I couldn't do anything about it. This is when it all began. The weirdness kept piling up. Frank had a very weird thing he would argue with. The other cleaner, Lisa. She was working there, the same warehouse that my boss's company was independent among the people other than. Lisa and I never mixed a lot. She was my friend, and she read me some of the ludicrous things Frank would say to her. Lisa was about 50, a no-nonsense type, and was more experienced than me. She said straightforwardness, and she told me she got a bad vibe from Frank, but I brushed it aside. Frank was peculiar. He did not blink at Lisa during an argument. This scared me. I began to think things about him were not okay. Later, I learned that Frank was a criminal who pretended to be a lawyer in order to steal money from elders. This shocked me a lot. I told my mom, and she also told me this was a good thing I had not talked to him for some weeks. I felt relieved, yet I was horrified what it could have been like. I did not think I would ever get over the feeling of having made a mistake. This experience showed me that some people can be totally different from what we think they are like. My impression of Frank is very horrible, and it makes my stomach turn when I think of it. We may never know who is a criminal and who is not. So, I learned about letting no one be trusted without any evidence. It is so important to keep conscious in life. Lisa was in a tough spot. I helped her, but she lied to me in a way that I couldn't believe. Frank glared at her, and I feared he a cold-hearted person like him. My skin crawled. Another time, a warehouse worker asked me for Frank's full name. It sounded strange, as I thought two names were alike in Chinese. Later, he showed me a wanted poster for Frank. He was posing as a lawyer and scamming old people using Frank's name to make them believe they were lawyers to them. They took all their money. I felt sick with fear and rushed home to my mom. I told her about the email. She said I was lucky I hadn't gotten involved with Frank. I should stay away from him. I was grateful I hadn't done anything yet, but I felt uneasy about what he had done and how I had trusted him. What had started as a problem had turned into a nightmare, just as I had worried it would be. My dad was furious at me for telling him that Frank was not who he thought he was. Dad warned me about Frank's shady past. He said Frank and his family were involved in crime and drugs, and if Dad ever found him, he would beat him. So, I was hoping to never see Frank again. But a few months later, my boss asked me to go clean up someplace, and when I got into the car, I was shocked to see Frank there. How did he know where we lived? I was terrified that Frank had found out where my family lived. My pals are tight-lipped concerning my place. Once, I could tell the vehicle owner. It was Frank. He said hi. I've been cold to him. He deceived old folks. I will never associate with him. One should judge early. I wish I have never met the fellow again. I was kind and he used that to invade my space. Frank is a scumbag. Life ought to be tough on you, buddy. I do not want to have anything to do with you, Frank. The old folks are your evil. One day, while working at McDonald's as a manager, I was left alone with a customer called Peter. He was old, and when he came to the window, he asked if I was single. I thought he looked too old for that. I nervously told him that I wasn't scared of being single. But he said something strange which made me feel uneasy. Later in the evening, just before I went home, I saw Peter's car parked just outside McDonald's. It startled me, and just before I entered my car, I felt something was not right. My car engine just died, which left me with no alternative. The peace of the night interrupted by a truck smarting its headlights at me. It ran towards my direction in a flash. I felt confused. I made attempts to shut the door of the car and lock all the doors up. My hands were shaking so much that I could scarcely put the ignition on. I was trapped. The truck was right in front of me. I saw as Eric, who was driving the truck, came out and headed towards me. I was so scared that I could feel my heart pounding against my chest. His face was already much close to my window. I screamed, "Get lost!" He little heed to my warning, but instead, he grinned strangely. He knocked on the glass and requested me to roll down the window so that we could talk. I did not know what to do, but I pushed it down a bit to listen to him better. He asked for my phone number, but I indisputably refused. I told him I would call the police if he didn't get back. After him surprising me, I hurried to shut my windows and did not pay attention to him after he went away in his car. As I drove home, I took a long way to ensure he wasn't on my trail. It took an hour for me to reach home, but in spite of not seeing him, I was still nervous. For the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself that it was over until I saw the red truck again. It was parked behind my car when I came out of my meeting. I told my friend about it right away. Later, when I went back to my car, that same guy yelled at me to roll down the window. Though he looked like he had an intention of wanting to talk with me, I opened it just a crack for communication purposes. He then made a nasty comment, implying that he wanted our time alone together. I said no to him very rudely and even threatened to involve the police if he didn't go away. The man put his hands up in a sign of surrender when I warned him, but I still felt uneasy because of the strange expression he had on his face. I just wanted to lock up my car and leave as soon as possible. I was alarmed and stepped back. He said I was strong. I closed the window and ignored him. He left. I drove away quickly. I turned on side streets to lose him. Even at home, I was still worried he might follow me. I looked around but did not see him. 3 weeks ago, I was at the AA meeting. After the meeting, I saw the red truck again. I ran back, frightened, and told Joan. She told me to stay inside while she talked to the driver. The truck left afterward. I thanked her and got into my car. I took the long way home like the last time. I checked my mirrors but did not see anything strange till I entered my street. My heart was racing as I turned into my neighbor's driveway, trying to escape the red truck following me, while also calling for help. When the police arrived, the truck was gone. They couldn't do much, telling me to call back if anything else happened. That night, I hardly slept. I couldn't stop thinking about how he got my address. He'd already done odd things, but coming to my home was too much. Just a few weeks later, I was starting to calm down. I hardly used TikTok back then and had only posted 4 videos with only 30 followers. The next day, I was worried when I saw a comment on my video showing my face. The comment said that my face made him happy because he saw it daily. If that was funny or a copycat, I don't know. I felt sick. It looked like a bad joke. I dashed to the police. The officer treated me harshly. He dismissed my fear as not a crime. I was bewildered. My heart raced. I called my parents. They were scared too. They invited me to stay with them. I warned my neighbors. A truck was creeping around. One neighbor saw it stop by my house. I am frightened. I want to stay where I am. I have a job at a dog care. My body is always tensed by the strange. One morning at my job, I was in the back. Suddenly, I saw movement in the bushes near the dog yard. I was curious about the noise at the clinic. I asked the receptionist. She had not heard it, but told about a homeless man who wanted to use the bathroom. She let him in, but felt uneasy. The receptionist told me about a scruffy man who asked to use the restroom. I went outside to see what was going on. I spotted him rummaging through his bag. His bike was parked against the wall. I was really nervous. There was a possibility something was wrong. I moved around to stay out of view, but could look at him. I saw him acting agitated. It looked like he was shouting and waving his arms. Some of it seemed like a problem. I went quickly to tell my colleague to call the police because he was yelling and knocking over decorations. Outdoors, he wrecked the flags and wreaths. Yelling for water, he banged on the door. We called cops, he raged. Sirens came, he ran away. In the yard were torn flags, scattered wreaths.